Hey everybody, JMac here in another Refactor Friday video. This is actually going to be a continuation of a video I did earlier in the week when working on an MVP feature, particularly the feature around upgrading subscriptions. You don't necessarily have to watch that other video. I'll provide a quick recap here, and we're just going to carry on with more of a focus on the code this time, particularly around writing the tests for these changes I want to make, as well as backfilling some that didn't exist before. So all around good refactor in my opinion. We're crafting tests and then using those tests to drive out new code. So a proper refactor, if you will. So just to catch anybody up who may not have watched the initial video, and of course you're welcome to, I try to keep those videos much shorter. These are a little longer because I get into the code and kind of just start completely at square one, and we work our way through, sometimes muddle our way through some of the changes. But this is dealing with the upgrading subscriptions path. So I previously had three plans, and I'm pulling one out and basically having an unlimited plan and then a per repository plan. And this modal was always something that was a bit overly complex, not only from a UX perspective, kind of looks a little Christmas tree-ish, lots of colors and buttons here. So hopefully we'll have the chance to slim that down, we'll get far enough. But if not, if nothing else, I want to support the removal of kind of that middle 5 repository plan tier. And I want to set it up where when I do get to the point where I'm changing this, I've got tests to kind of give me confidence that I'm on the right path, and I can write more easily tests for those new features as well. So let's get started with just kind of the simplest path here. I always like to kind of get the ball rolling with anything I can, just to gain a little momentum. But you'll see two forms inside of here. So the first form we have is basically the subscription, or sorry, that's actually the bottom form. Let's scroll up here. There we go, that's what I want. So we have this shifty plan. No, that's still that one. Where is this? Oh, it's just a straight button. Okay, there's no form really here. Well, there is a form, of course, but there's no wrapped form. So this is actually a separate form. The point here is that it goes to plan quantity. So, and this is just a nod to resourceful controllers. Adam Wathan's Cruddy by Design. That's a talk he gave at a previous LairCon. You can see it on YouTube if you're interested. But the goal here is to always try to use the 7 resourceful actions within the Laravel framework. So instead of overloading kind of the upgrade your subscription, you're kind of changing the quantity of a subscription. You're not, I guess, directly affecting the subscription itself as far as the plan. I consider the plan that you're on the subscription. And then changing the quantity is an ancillary action, but it would create a lot of logic in that controller action to determine, okay, well, am I keeping the same plan but upgrading the quantity, or am I changing the plan completely and decreasing the quantity? So this allows me to kind of separate the two. But who knows, maybe in the process of testing we find that it makes more sense to pile these back down together. So, but either way, again, the point here in any refactor is to kind of backfill any necessary tests before writing new code. So I'm going to backfill the test for this plan quantity first, and we'll kind of just see how far we get from there. So I'm just going to throw these in a feature test for now because I've been kind of putting them here, but this structure is something I might end up changing. But again, I'm not going to worry about it right now. My focus is to write this new test. So let's just make a new PHP unit test. I think their builder actually ends up being a little bit difficult, but the class to test here is effectively going to be that plan quantity controller. And it should give us everything we need here, so let's go ahead and say OK. And we don't actually want to extend that framework test directly. We're going to want to extend the test case. So Laravel gives us a couple things out of the box by their own little parent class here, and we want to use that. And we won't actually instantiate the plan quantity controller directly, so I can just pull that off. Let's kill that sidebar. And what we're going to do is, I did make some changes earlier in the week, so I just kind of brought these up here as a reminder. So this is just where I removed code from the views, the database seeder, and so forth. Anywhere where it was very obvious to move that 5 plan subscription level. I've run the test to demonstrate that they are all passing at the moment. And I don't have any tests here in this perform shift test. This is just kind of a annoying, purposeful reminder to me to finish that up, but that's not part of the work today. So I'm going to run these tests again. And since these do take just a second or two, I'm going to focus on just testing these. So let me just copy this down. Let's go ahead and clear the screen, and we'll run that command as well, but test just this. Oh, I need to pass the actual test. So let's change this path. We'll do vendor bin PHP unit. I think it gives us, no it doesn't. Shucks. We'd have to have a failing test. So that's going to be test, feature, plan, quantity, controller, test.php. There we go. That'll just be a little faster for us, so we'll focus in on these. So let's bring up this quantity, plan quantity controller. We'll cut it off to the right there. Let's just kind of get an idea of what's going on here. Pretty straightforward stuff. We have a subscription that's going to be on a user. We're going to increment the quantity. And again, when I have existing code and I'm writing a test to kind of backfill it, I just kind of work very sequentially. I just start at the top line and start testing my way all the way down to the bottom. So this is very simple action here. In fact, these are cashier helper methods that are on here, increment quantity and decrement quantity. That's all just kind of built into the subscription. So that's pretty nice. So let's get it going here. This is super straightforward. There's no logic in here. And that's, again, just a nod to using those resourceful controllers. Instead of having to have a bunch of if checks again to determine what type of data was submitted in the form, I can have a very streamlined 3-line action here because I just broke it out to a separate controller and allowed the logic to be simply a separate form on the front end, right? So very straightforward stuff there because of that, or very straightforward code because of that early on design decision. So this is going to be a test. So let's say public function store, or well, let's keep the convention here. It increments a plan, or let's say the plan quantity. Super simple test here. Again, just because that code path is pretty smooth. So we are going to need a user object and a subscription, and then from there, everything should kind of take care of itself. I think I know though right away there's actually going to be an issue with testing this because stubbing out cashier I think is a little bit difficult. So let's give it a shot, and if we run into some problems there, we'll give it the old 5-minute try, and if not, that might be something I have to revisit in a future episode. So let's do this. Let's take some code here just so I don't have to rewrite this. Let's bring in the user. We're just going to create a user. We're going to use that user here. Let's set up a quantity here of maybe just some kind of random number. Can we do this with Faker? Oh, we don't have access to Faker here, so we'll just say 2. Sometimes I like to have test variants, but it'll be okay here otherwise. And we will effectively, let's take this subscription and we'll store it off because we're going to want to compare it later on. And now we can make a request. Whoops, not that kind of request. We'll do a request or response, I'm sorry. And we'll say this, and these are some helpers that are available. And this is going to be a store request. So there's post. And the URL in this case is going to be the route. I believe I've called this, let's look at the front end, or our router. I like to use the routes in here again. It prevents me from having to write all sorts of things. So we do have a resourceful action. It's called plan quantity, and we limit it to just the only store and destroy. So again, those resourceful actions coming into play. And that will be called plan quantity.store. And we don't need to pass it any request data because it knows, again, based on what we've done, to just increment the quantity. So that's about all we have to do. We'll basically say response is successful. It's just a nice little shorthand for status 200. And we'll also make sure, or well, actually, we want to assert that it's a redirect. Look at that. So redirect, assert redirect, and we're going to want to make sure that it went to, again, route. We can say route subscriptions dot show, and again, this is really just, as some of the Laravel folk would say, spell checking right now. It's not that grand of a test, but I want to have the coverage nonetheless. And again, we might add some new features here in a minute, depending on if cashier is easy enough to kind of fake out. Okay, and then there's one more thing we need to test here. So just kind of visually eyeballing it here, we're definitely going to have this test. We're going to see that that happens. We have this redirect covered. We don't have this line covered though, so let's just make sure we do that as well. So let's say response, let's see, assert session has plan quantities is what we're calling it, and increased. So we're going to set that session variable. In this case, it's a flash variable. There's really no difference underneath the covers. This just gets an extra store off, but I don't think that there is a helper method to determine that it's distinctly a flash message. Maybe if I'm wrong about that, someone please correct me in the comments. And then finally, we want to mess with the subscription a little bit again. We want to make sure that the subscription, if we refresh it or get a fresh copy from the database, so let's just restore that. And I've seen people use the tap method here. It's pretty fancy. We could do that, but I like to keep things top level. So I'm just going to do this, and we'll say assert same. And I want to make sure the assertion, in this case, the expectation is going to be that that planned quantity is 3, and the subscription quantity is now 3 as well. So it actually incremented and kind of did the right thing here. Now, the issue, of course, is going to be that I am pretty sure when we go run this test, cashier is not going to like us. So let's find out. So we actually have what? A users table issue. That's interesting. No such table. Oh, I know what the issue is. Sometimes I forget that trait of refresh database. If you don't do that, it's not actually going to build up the database for you. So of course that is not going to be found. So okay, cool. So now we actually get a situation where, okay, we're not redirecting properly. So it doesn't think we're logged in is what I'm going to guess. Line 25, if we go look at that, here's line 25. So we're not even getting a redirect, which means this post is probably not being authenticated correctly, which makes sense because I didn't have a acting as here. Whoops. So let's act as that user that we created or faked. And then let's, PHP Storm kind of messed me up here. Let's get this post subcall back in there correctly. Okay, cool. So now we get an error code 500, a little dense there. So let's turn on this without exception handling. So we get a full error response, and I'm almost positive, unfortunately, this is going to be a Stripe/cashier issue. Yes, there is. So because of this Stripe customer bit, because cashier is ultimately trying to reach out to Stripe, cashier is going to get in the way here a little bit. So let's just do a quick web search and see if there's some kind of way to fake cashier. And like not, well, that's not going to work. Fake Laravel cashier. Okay, so yeah, I've definitely gone down this path before, as you can tell from my Google search results. Okay, so we can define Laravel cashier. We make a fake class. And then what do they do? Okay, well they're not doing something. They're mocking the subscription, which we've already solved, so that's not our issue. Unit testing a subscription. Let's see what we have here. Anything that looks valuable? New subscription. For any future Googlers, I've decided to mock subscriptions during testing by adding an overridable method. Wow. That actually creates subscriptions in my repository. So again, the creation of subscriptions is not the problem. It's actually this increment quantity that's the problem. Um, It's like we want to assert that that got called, but this seems to be more specific about the feature itself, not necessarily testing. So I remember looking again. You can tell I've looked at this before, and I've gone uh, pretty far down the line here, trying to find how to mock that out. It just doesn't seem to be something that's readily available. So let's time box this to about 5 minutes. And what I want to do is just kind of go core diving. And let's go into subscription. I've overridden this subscription, so let's go to the cashier subscription a little lower level and see what might be down here. Somewhere in here there's an increment. Yeah, here's increment quantity, which calls update quantity. And this as Stripe subscription right here. This is, I guarantee this is where we're running into some issues. So line 287, there we are right there, cashier line 287. And it in turn calls billable and so forth and API operations in the Stripe. So this is definitely our point of issue right here. And in fact, I probably could comment this out. Let's just do this for fun. I'm going to comment this out just for giggles. And let's see if we get a little farther down the rabbit hole. Okay, cool. So we don't have an object here, so we can't go that far. So let's actually go down in as Stripe customer. Let's user as Stripe customer. So I wonder if we could stub this out some way. Yeah, this is going to be pretty deep. So the user, the billable user trait is now going to be the one that seems to make this low-level call. Here's a swap. That's interesting. Swap the subscription to, oh, that's sorry. I was thinking facade swap. This is actually a legitimate method inside of the subscription itself to swap it for another plan. Okay. Well, let's keep hacking away here. Let's look at the code itself. Let's look at this billable trait. There's a charge, there's a refund, tab, invoice for, new subscription. I was hoping to see that as customer method in here somewhere. Let's see if we can just find it. As customer, doesn't seem to be in here. Is that what that was called? Let's go back. Where were we? As Stripe customer is what it's called. Let's try that. As Stripe. There it is. Is it in here? Yes, it is. So Stripe customer retrieve. Here we go. This seems to be facade-esque. Let's see. This is an API resource. Okay. Is there a way to fake this out? Because this is definitely low-level stuff, which is actually in Stripe. That's not even in Cashier. It's probably lower level than I want it to be. I'm not seeing any hooks in here, to be honest. This might be something that requires a bit more depth, a deeper dive into. Yeah, this really just, gosh, this really just retrieves that from, there's so many ways. I mean, you can even see in this trait alone, there are so many ways in which, this calls invoices, this calls sources. I mean, to stub this out the right way would really require super intimate knowledge of how Cashier works underneath the covers and be very, very, very brittle. So, because of that, this is what we have two options. We can do kind of the I learned it from JBrains or JB Rainsberger. He's a pretty active tester in the Java community. I've learned from him that when you kind of stumble upon these, kind of a unit test approach is to basically push this off to the boundary, meaning we could take this increment quantity and kind of push it a little bit lower into the subscription, basically a location where we would have access to kind of make sure that this was called on some kind of object ourselves. And from there, we would kind of just trust that Stripe is working and maybe have, again, integration tests that that perform that behavior with a legitimate setup of a Stripe customer. So there's a little bit of a roadblock there in that piece. So what we're going to do is this. We're going to move on and test the other controller just in the interest of time and making sure that we actually make some progress. So I like to make these videos about 45 minutes. So let's switch gears. We're right at the halfway mark here. Let's switch gears and let's go ahead and, for completeness, have a decrements quantity. And we would expect 1 here if we decreased it. And we would expect that we went to subscription show and this was called with decrease. Now these tests aren't going to work, I'm aware of that. But again, just so I kind of finish the happy path of where I would be, I'm going to leave these here and I'm going to remove their test annotation. And much like that other test that we saw originally, we should get a warning now that there are no tests in here. I have the foundations of some, but until I determine the appropriate way, or maybe again, hopefully, if someone is aware of some kind of cashier faking method so we can kind of swap out the Stripe API, or an easy way from an integration perspective to validate that, then somebody definitely let me know in the comments. But otherwise, until then, we're going to leave the work we've done here, because there is value in it. We're going to leave the work that we've done here just kind of as is, but not part of our tests that are actually running. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and copy this plan quantity controller, and I'm going to bring this into the subscription controller test, which I believe is maybe already being tested here. No, that's a subscription bit. So not there. That's the actual low-level subscription. So let's go ahead and copy this, and let's move on to the next element in our form, which is this section here, which this calls, just to be sure, this calls out to account, not that one. Now we're confused the other way. This calls subscriptions shifty plan update with the plan override here of the put method. So this is actually going to be the one that swaps your plan. So let's go ahead and call this subscription controller test. I'm just going to copy what we have because we know the setup's going to be super similar. Let's shut this down over here and go ahead and bring up our subscription controller on the right side here. So I'm going to close these previous tests, and let's change the proper naming here with our copy pasta. And now it's a subscription controller test, and let's go ahead and get this test up and running, and we should see a similar warning, and we'll just kind of start back filling these. So subscription controller test, and we have our warning, and now we want to focus on the update. So here's update, and we basically determine the old plan that you were on, which we should be able to have access to that. Look, we're already calling swap here. We're updating the quantity. So some interesting stuff here. So we know that this swap is going to be an issue. We know that we're not going to be able to call update quantity. There's definitely going to be some issues here, and we have some old stuff that's happening. So we're going to run into the same problem, unfortunately, with this subscription here. But let's go ahead, nonetheless, build out the beginnings of this test and kind of see how far we get. So this should be, it swaps the shifty plan. So we'll just say shifty plan. And we'll leave the exception handling on. We're going to generate a user. We're going to make a user ID. Let's go ahead and put them on a particular plan. So this is going to be the plan name, I believe. And this is going to, let's double check that in the database while I'm at it. So localhost, let's go to Laravel, shift, and subscriptions. And let's go ahead and get in here. So yes, it's actually Stripe plan, not the plan name. So Stripe plan is plan 5, so I already have an old sample there in my test database. So this is called the Stripe plan. say plan 1. And the quantity, we'll just leave it at 2 just for giggles because we can already see that we're going to decrease that. So we want to call subscriptions. Is it subscription or subscriptions? Let's check the web route again. And let's go back over here. So we have subscriptions. It is a resource controller for the create method. Where is update? Where are you, update? Resume. Where is update? That's interesting. Is there a put? We have put. Subscription resume? I don't have a put anywhere else. Let's look at the view. How is it? Oh, I see. We have a resource controller of accept create. I confused myself there. So we're getting everything else inside of there. And then there's an additional resource for resume. So actually a couple areas here I remember where it's not 100% cruddy by design or using those resourceful controllers. So definitely maybe some things to clean up in the future, that resume bit. But everything other than create is a resourceful controller. So we know that we can do subscriptions dot update, and we're going to need to pass it the Shifty plan subscription, the subscription, of course, that we have in the database or that we're part of. And then in this case, we are going to need to pass it some additional information. So let's just break this down since I'm going to pass some data. And in this case, we're going to need to pass a plan name. So this is the plan. So that's simply plan. And in this case, we want to go to the infinite plan, I believe. It'll be a good test. And let's get a comma there so PHP likes us again. Okay, cool. And we are going to redirect already to the same redirect. We're going to flash this subscription updated, so real similar to that other path. But there are some things that are happening here. So that's the part I want to kind of better understand and drive out. And I even left this note from the video earlier in the week. So let's get this swapped out. So it is going to the subscriptions show. It is no longer doing that, but instead flashing this particular message. And we know that the flash underneath the covers actually defaults to a true value. So that's just something I knew. So as long as the session has that, we know it should be true. So the value is actually kind of unimportant. So in fact, I'm going to pull that off. So long as this is in the session, that's all that we more or less care about. Again, it'd be nice to know that it was flashed. And again, maybe there's a helper for that. So do let me know. And then finally, we want to assert that the Shifty plan, our previous Shifty plan, had been updated appropriately. Now there's a couple different things that are going to get changed here. So there's also a couple different options that I could use in this case. So I could refresh this and pull it from the database myself and then assert multiple things on it. But instead of doing all that, I think what I'd rather do is have the memory of the original subscription and make some comparisons to it by using the this assert database has some particular values. So the database in this case table is going to be subscriptions, and I'm going to want to assert a couple different things. So first of all, I want to make sure that the subscription ID is the exact same as the one we of course created earlier. I also want to make sure that the user ID didn't somehow get swapped out, so that's pretty important. So this is just kind of an integrity check here. So we can do user ID here. We'll just keep it symmetrical by using subscription. I could have used the user, but I like, again, kind of maintaining a consistent tone here. And then finally, quantity in this case should be decremented to 1. And another thing we want to do here is, of course, the plan name or plan type that we learned about a minute ago should be removed. So the stripe, changed. So the stripe plan should get swapped out with the inf plan, the infinity plan. And there we have it. So that should be a pretty good test for what we have here. Now we have some to-dos and this and that. We also know, unfortunately, This is going to be a little bit painful to run right now because of this. So we're going to have to kind of punt on that for the moment. But let's try to better understand, kind of again, just mentally, how this is kind of going to be tested out. So we get the old plan, cool. So that's going to be plan 1 here. We're going to swap it out for the new plan. That's going to be the infinity plan. And then we have some information here where we review this more closely. Okay, so I want to review this. So what we used to do was if the old plan was plan 1, which we are, and the request input for the new plan was plan 5, but then we negate this whole thing. So I'm going to apply De Morgan's here and actually flip this around so it's just a little bit easier to read. That's a pretty complex conditional, and there were definitely some opportunities there to improve that code with some of my own base code practices. So let's apply De Morgan's, kind of make this less complex, and try to read it the other way. And again, this is all subjective. Like, to me, this is less complex than the negation of a compound conditional. You might be the other way, and that's totally fine. So, but I couldn't read it, so I'm gonna pack it back down logically. So basically what we're saying is if the old plan's not plan 1, and the plan you're upgrading to is not plan 5, then we actually want to remove your past plan repositories. So that is something I would want to test for. So why would I want to remove plan repositories? Basically, if you're downgrading your plan, I see what's happening here. If you're upgrading your plan, we're going to remove your plan repositories. That's a bit harsh of a cleanup. So I just don't think, now that I know a little bit more about plan repositories, I don't think I'd want to remove them because, again, this is a bit forceful. Like, if you swapped your plan and then next month you swapped back down and I removed all your repositories, that's actually kind of a bad user experience. Because then you have to put all your repositories back in. So there's probably a more graceful way to save these. So I am going to remove this line. So now our test is actually complete. But I'm going to change this to do to say something along the lines of gracefully swap to, gracefully swap or retain, better yet, the plan repositories, or rebuild from automation. Cool. Okay, so we're going to do that. And this actually plays into the fact that there's another aspect that I'm thinking of too that I'm going to go ahead and put a to-do tag on here. So when you when you downgrade from infinite plan, need to determine the quantity based on plan repositories. So what that means to me is if you're on an infinity plan and for some reason maybe you're not utilizing, from a cost-effective standpoint, you're not utilizing enough plans to have that be, again, cost-effective for you, when you downgrade, you probably don't want to go directly down to the single plan. You probably want to go down to a plan that would match the number of repositories that you're currently using and automating as part of your subscription. And so that's what this tells me to do in the future. And I've only written to-dos here. I'm not going to try to drive that out with tests because I don't know what that looks like yet. So unfortunately, I think we're probably going to have to stop here. But what I want to do is I want to get rid of this other one, but I want to make placeholder tests for these two. So there's uniformity between what my intended goal was of the test and then some to-dos kind of talking about how I might want to implement that. So let's do that for a second. I don't think we need this old plan anymore. And you know what? Honestly, we probably need some kind of check that, you can't somehow hack this and swap for your same plan. So anyways, let's do that. Let's do public function. It disallows swapping to same plan. And of course, we'll need to implement this. So I'll just put a little to-do tag in the test as well. So I just want to, again, since I'm in this space here, even though I'm going to back away from this based on the cashier bit, I'm going to kind of back off that, and I'll probably put that in a future video just, again, for the full follow-up. So keep an eye out for it. But for today, let's at least get on the same page of the tests that I need to continue to write once I have a battle plan for that. So just to be thorough. So the next thing is it downgrades from an infinite plan and retains with, let's say, with proper quantity. And I might clean up that name down the road, but so basically when you're downgrading from an infinite plan, we need to properly set the quantity. So that's effectively this, and then both tests need to maintain kind of this graceful swapping of that. And so this will really end up being part of this test as well as this test. So let's do a to-do here. Ensure plan repositories were maintained. Cool. It looks like I have a little bit of a typo there, so let's just copy this because Petri Storm's going a little slow with our recording. Okay, and again, we're going to stop there. So just to recap, ran into an issue here where the integration testing of Stripe is going to be a little bit difficult through Cashier. That's not Cashier's fault. That's not Stripe's fault. That's just kind of the way the code is. It doesn't have it doesn't either have the proper setup for the test. This is testable if I were to set up a customer, that had these proper plans or whatnot, and I could do that. Just like if you're familiar with Stripe, you can use the credit card, the Visa number for testing, 424242 all the way, repeating. I could do the same thing. I could create a test user that's in my test Stripe API, so this call actually happens. But to set that up and have it swap back and forth between the plan would require these tests to either have a lot more setup, to be run in a very specific order to make sure that, again, that wasn't, ruined in some kind of way. So there would have to be a lot of setup that happened up here, to make sure that the data in that remote API was, just right. And that's probably not something I want to do. So again, what I'm probably leaning towards, just to give some ideas, and again, I'll do this in a future video for completeness, but what I'm probably leaning towards is making some kind of subscription helper where I push these to the boundary. Kind of, again, JB Rainsberger speak there, JBrains. And I'll push it to the boundary. I'll test that I call that subscription helper with the proper plan and with the proper quantity. And then obviously do that as well in that test that we wrote earlier on in the video. So again, got a little stuck here, but this is all part of the game, and I think it's still valuable to see that. And if you have pushed your way through this, please, again, let me know on Twitter, let me know in the comments. But my plan of attack is, again, either to push it to the boundary, but I'm going to do just a little more due diligence first to see what's written out there already. Particularly, I know Adam Wathan's Test-Driven Laravel course definitely has a section on managing Stripe. So I'm going to dig up those videos and take a look at that because I know I picked up a copy of that course a while back. So we'll see what he did and kind of report back and go from there. So thanks you all for watching, and hopefully see you next Friday.